This is the Propcast, and I'm Louisa Dickins. Before we introduce our guest, here's a quick word from our sponsor.
Hi, I'm Leon Cantor from Future Place, organisers of the largest tech and innovation event for real estate in Australasia, the Real Estate Innovation Festival, taking place from 9th to 10th of November in Sydney. For more information, please visit realestateinnovationfestival.com.
Today on the Propcast, we are joined by British Land's Head of Strategy, Digital and Technology, Sally Jones, and Head of Environmental Sustainability, Matt Webster. Welcome to the show, Sally and Matt. Hi, Lou.
Hi, Lou. Thanks for having me on.
Now, for those listening in from the US or APAC, British Land is one of Europe's largest listed real estate investment management companies that own and manage a portfolio valued at, I think the most recent stat is 14.3 billion. Now, today, Sally will share with us how her role has changed since I think you joined in 2010, which is obviously more on the investor relations side, to now all things strategy, data insights, technology and innovation. Matt's going to be sharing the plan for net zero by 2030, and hopefully he'll be sharing with us a couple of examples of British Land's net zero and sustainable developments. As you have probably guessed, it's not Matt's first rodeo. In 2019, after a 10-year strategy, Matt managed to lead British Land to 55% reduction in its operational energy intensity, which is pretty impressive. And it's definitely something to shout about. Matt, probably a bit too modest, but I'm not. So I really want to share it with you. We're going to talk about it later. Sally's going to be sharing with us some of the technologies that I'm using. There's a couple of, whether it's tenant experience and sort of data platforms, which you might want to hear about. And then obviously we're going to finish off the podcast and share a bit more about what to expect for the future in terms of technology and ESG as well. So let's get started. Now, Sally, obviously in the introduction, I mentioned about how your role has changed, but also before that, what were you doing before British Land? I think you were working at Cadbury's, which obviously is a brand we all know. But how did you get into this sort of strategy, technology and digital role?
Yeah, well, I just started at Cadbury and I did do investor relations at Cadbury, which was how I landed at British Land. But I've always been fascinated in strategy. So I was given the opportunity to lead the strategy team in 2015. And I've had a fantastically broad range of jobs actually at British Land, a bit too long to mention on this podcast. But what has been so fascinating about is being able to combine strategy, lastly, with all things digital and technology. So I think, as you said, I am now in charge of building tech, insights, and the whole technology stack, which is such a privilege. I think how I've got them is because each of them lead into another. And technology really came because of my interest in how technology was changing the shape of the property industry and all the work we did shortly after I took over that role. So I feel very fortunate to have been able to kind of follow my interest.
Yeah, ever listening in before, well, maybe the early stages of starting up LMRE, Sally very kindly took a meeting with me and I wandered in very naively and green to the British Land office in London. And she gave me about an hour of my time telling me about technologies, telling me about, I think it was you telling me sort of what websites to go on, what all the sort of platforms that were sort of out there. So I'm forever in debt to Sally. And now I'm delighted that she's joining me on 10th season of the podcast as well. Now, we're also joined by Matt, who I mentioned earlier, is the Head of Environmental Sustainability. Matt, for the audience, could you tell us a little bit more about what your role is? I don't think lots of these roles in the ESG space, sustainability space, are new, especially for the real estate sector. What does that exactly entail and how did you get there?
Yeah, lovely. So I've been at British Land a number of years as well now and had the fortune to spend a bit of time in different sections around the business, but always with an angle on the sustainability side of things. So I joined from Arup, the big engineering consultancy, where I was a sustainability consultant and back then helping British Land with some of its earlier work and thinking around carbon footprinting and starting to understand the carbon footprint of its building and of its portfolios. So I think, British Land really has been doing this a long time. And I was fortunate enough to come across and join on secondment and then was retained to deliver the 55% energy target that you mentioned. And we are very proud of the fact that we were able to deliver that over the 10-year period from 2009 to 2019. In those days, I think we were early adopters of thinking as a landlord and a custodian of spaces and places that it was our responsibility to kind of collaborate with our customers and work towards understanding our footprint. So getting the data and the processes in place to do that, but then also start working towards reducing it, and early adopters of some of the technologies that we can talk about later on, but smart metering and kind of sustainability platforms being one of them.
Awesome. Well, look, I'm looking forward to hearing about them in about 5 minutes. Now, your teams obviously work closely together, but you both are looking at different strategies. And I know they will come into them, I'm sure, at some points. But Sally, could you maybe elaborate a little bit more about the digital strategy and what triggered it? And when did you start looking at creating a digital strategy?
Yeah. So obviously digital strategy can be very broad. So for these purposes, I think I'll just focus on the digital that relates to the buildings. And we rather grandly call this digital placemaking. And we first seriously started working on it in 2015. And we created what we call the smart team at that point. In fact, Matt had one leg in the smart team and one leg in the sustainability team. We'd realized that digitizing buildings was going to become a really big thing. And we had people working variously around the business. And we thought it'd be a good idea to bring them all together into one place. Now, there wasn't many of them. There was a very small team, and that we would create a strategy with a very focused approach. And that's kind of what it was. And we were focused on doing three things, essentially. One is improving people's experience of our real estate through digitizing it, building greater understanding through data, and then also using all of that to drive greater efficiency. And of course, when you think about sustainability, it crosses all of those three things. Yeah, so I think that's probably in a nutshell what the digital strategy is at a high level.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now I'm Matt, onto, I guess, how the sustainability strategy fits into what Sally was saying.
Yeah, thank you. So as I say, we've been thinking about sustainability for a long while now, and our latest strategy runs from a 2019 baseline out to 2030. And it's fair to say that it's equally balanced between environmental issues and social issues. So on the social side, we've got a pretty clear framework around implementing what we call a local charter, but taking a place-based approach to that. So working within the framework of that charter that looks at things like local employment, skills and opportunities and things like that, but making sure it's fit for purpose in that local place and that local asset. But my expertise and focus is on the environmental side of things. And I think we're probably all aware of the climate emergency that we're facing. So we have a big, ambitious target of getting to net zero carbon by 2030. And as a developer and an operator of space, we have kind of two big sources of carbon that we need to worry about. Embodied carbon, which is the carbon associated with the materials, the components and the processes that are associated with the developments that we're working on. And then operational carbon, which is related to the energy that is used for running our assets. And so we're trying to reduce our embodied carbon by 2030 by 50%. And we're aiming for a 75% reduction in our operational carbon.
Wow.
Yeah. So some really big, ambitious targets there and lots of challenges associated with achieving those. But we've got a fairly close plan. Now, integral to that is delivery of the digital strategy that Sally mentioned, because it will help us deliver, those ambitious targets on the sustainability side of things.
Absolutely. No pressure then for both of you. Matt, now I read about a couple of your development projects. There's one, I think it's called 100 Liverpool Street, and there's one in Canada Water. Could you elaborate a little bit more about these projects and how, whether they're obviously helping out the social side or the environmental side of things?
Yeah, lovely. So I can start with 100 Liverpool Street. That is our first net zero development. And what that means is on the embodied side that I mentioned, so all of the materials and the components going into that building, we've taken a whole life cycle carbon approach, which means we measure the embodied carbon through the design stages and then predict what carbon that building will be responsible for. That building benefited from significant reuse of the structure of the building that was there previously. And so it's only in the last few years that we've been able to measure embodied carbon, and we can give it actually a figure of 389 kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent per meter squared. So it's an intensity benchmark. And our target for 2030 is development of around 500. So 100 Liverpool Street performed really well against that target, coming in significantly under. To get it to a net zero development, we worked really hard to design carbon out all the way through the design process, then think about how it's going to operate once it's a live building. And then as an action of last resort, any carbon that can't be designed out is mitigated through certified offsets projects. So that project did require the offsetting of the 389 that I mentioned at PC. I think it's also a really interesting building to mention because it's one of our first to deliver some of the things we've been thinking about in terms of the digital strategy as well.
It's interesting what you're saying, obviously, folks, about, I guess, embodied carbon and your past experience, I guess, role at Arup as well. I was involved in, it's got a long title. It was Catapult Places, Contech, Startup Accelerator, something like that. But there was 10 SMEs who made it into it. And the ones which got most attention and obviously got the partners like Arup's attention was all the ones that are focusing on carbon capture and everything like that. The others, obviously, I'm sure we'll get pilots elsewhere, but when we had to do the summary, construction firms developers were sort of biting their hands off for. And what about Canada Water? It's something like 53 acres, mixed use regeneration project. What's the sort of aim or mission behind that, or the pillars?
Yeah, that's a really exciting master plan that we're working on. It's in the Rotherhithe Peninsula, which is south of the river, for people that are not too familiar with London's geography. And so, as a mixed-use development means lots of new public realm and then lots of different types of buildings going into that. So residential, office blocks, as well as ground floor retail. I guess on my side of things, really proud of how we're trying to embed sustainability principles into that master plan. So all of the targets that I've set you through are applicable to Canada Water. So all of the developments and the different plots coming forward there will be working through whole life carbon assessments to reduce their embodied carbon. And they're also aiming for really stretching operational targets to ensure that they're run as efficiently as possible over their lifetimes. And again, it's a really good example of sustainability and digital kind of interweaving, because the buildings there are also implementing what we call our Smart Building Design Guide, which helps our design teams think through how they can digitally enable a building to get useful data out of it during design, which helps us run it more efficiently during operation.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We're obviously going to go on to a bit more about the data platform in a minute, but Sally, bringing you back in, obviously you're being on the exec board of Equium, obviously big fan of Gab there and what they're doing. In terms of technologies, I think you're using a couple. Is there anything more that you'd like to sort of share with us, what's working for British Land and I guess how you're utilising them?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the interesting things as I look back over the 5 years is kind of what we've learned. And we were probably trying a lot of point solutions along the way. And what we have, I think, successfully transitioned to is working with a fewer number of partners. So I think, you kind of asking the questions, which technologies are we trialing internally and externally? And I would kind of group it into 3 areas to think about. So what Matt talked about was smart enabling a building, which is how you make it digitally capable. And that's to do things like converged networks. Matt's a real expert if you want to get him to talk about more of this in detail, because he's been right at the coalface. And that, and the key for that is to allow us to get data out of the building in such a way as that we can surface it, through a single platform. And that single platform allows us both to see what's going on, see what's working, what's not working, but then also over time to manage the building more efficiently through the use of machine learning and AI. And then we can control it sort of, I guess it's more automated. And obviously when you do that, you can drive a lot of efficiency. So I know, Matt is relying on some of that process in order to drive operational efficiencies. And there we're working with a company called Facilio. Previously we had some point solutions, but they have built now this entire data platform for us on which things like AI can sit. So that's the first, I guess it's the second point, which is part of that platform is Equium, as you say. So they are a more conventional tenant experience business, but actually in some ways it's difficult to know where the Facilio platform and the Equium platform begins and ends. Because, for example, the Equium platform goes all from the traditional things like, events and retail through things like room bookings, visitor management for Story and for the buildings, and then some operational property management tools, and digitizing some of the operational documents for property management. And then, so what's so great about it, for example, we can now do, because we link those two platforms together, is we can now see where rooms are being used, but they've not been booked or paid for. You can also see where rooms are being used and where we've got lighting on full blast or, heating on full blast, for example, at the wrong times of the day. So if you look at those three big blocks, I would say that's the core of how we are driving the digitization of our buildings. And it's the only thing where we're already doing a point solution is some people on your podcast might be sympathetic to this or have had the same experience, is digital passes are something which is very difficult to make. I mean, various digital passes in the building. And I'm sad to say we still haven't come up with a great solution where you have a digital pass on your phone and it works throughout the building. Very hard.
Someone actually on an earlier podcast for the season was mentioning that they were sort of looking to do that as well. So yeah, you're definitely we're not finding the perfect solution for that. Matt, is there anything you'd like to elaborate on in terms of the data side of smart buildings on top of what Sally just said?
Yeah, just to echo some of what Sally said, I'll take us back to 100 Liverpool Street because that's really the first building delivered with the Smart Building Design Guide, and we've learned an awful lot in the development and delivery of that building. Just a bit more detail. So I guess there was lots of talk, and design processes with these types of buildings are 5, 6, 7 years long. So technology moving on very rapidly, and real estate design and procurement lengths probably taking a bit longer than that. So how do you design and deliver a building that's going to be up to date and future-proofed at its practical completion, but one that you started thinking about of 5 years ago? And what we've tried to do is get our developments internet ready, essentially, which is what Sally said around smart enabling. So traditionally in a building, all sorts of sophisticated, complicated systems that often work in silos or are commissioned in silos. So you'll have lighting with a lighting control system, and it'll be able to do lots of wonderful things, but just on its own and just with lighting. My experience on delivering the 55% target, a lot of that was through installing and retrofitting smart metering systems. So knowing exactly where and when energy is consumed in a building, that probably delivered us a 20% saving overnight. But really excited on 100 Liverpool Street that it's got that system in it, but that system is now connected and communicating its data to a wider platform. And really, when I think about that platform, it's doing us a number of things. So, smart enabling a building, getting data out of all of these siloed systems, lighting, HVAC, security, occupancy, internal air quality, metering systems, etc. But having that data, able to get that into the cloud, so it takes us away from just being able to operate that building, being based in the building, to being able to take a software approach to the building, and something that I call the tester approach. So when you do an update or deliver a new piece of a dashboard, you can apply that at the portfolio level rather than having to keep replicating that within each building. And so, that data set's giving us deeper insights. So moving from energy monitoring to actually understanding how plant is performing in real time. And so just a really quick example of that, at 100 Liverpool Street, we've noticed that some of the fan call units, for whatever reason, were coming on at 3 o'clock in the morning. And, back in the day, that would have probably taken us a number of months to realize that. But with this data, you can quickly get to that and understand that something's happening. An alarm triggered for us, pointed us towards that spike in the graph. And then the engineering team can go and investigate what's causing that to come on. So a lot deeper insights and a lot broader data sets that are going to help us consider many different factors and data points in a single platform.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that and also elaborating more on the case study. I think earlier this year, you fully let 100 Liverpool Street as well. And I think so many tenants are now looking to get into these healthier buildings and everything like that. So no doubt it's also been pretty good for leasing too. And then you want to read more about it, literally go onto British Land and, type in 100 Liverpool Street on Google, and I'm sure you'll find out a little bit more. Now, obviously, it sounds like everything's going to plan at the moment, both your strategies so far, but let's look at current and future obstacles you think, just in general, we've got ahead of us in terms of, Sally, you've talked about some digital obstacles and that you can elaborate more on the sustainability side. And so I do want to go first about, so what do we have ahead? What can we do more? What do we really need to tackle?
Yeah, I think that there's the age-old thing in real estate, which Matt has already alluded to. It's kind of the time lag. It's the length of time it takes to develop a building And it's the length of time it's going to take us to renew the building stock. We talk very eloquently about our new developments, but we're now turning our attention to our older buildings, where that's much more of a headache because some of them have better or worse sort of networks inside them. So, ultimately, we're all going to have to think about how we, to use the word, retrofit our old buildings. And I don't think that challenge is going to change. It's been there for a number of years and it's going to be there going forward. So I think the other thing for me is it's still the cost because it's a very nascent industry. We're better off now than we were a few years ago, but most of the companies are still small. I think they're still looking to charge too much. And it's when you sort of talk to them about the fact is, how do you think you can pass on £1 a square foot to a company who pays £60 a square foot in rent? That is tremendously difficult. So I think we have to figure out a way of delivering this digitization much more cheaply. And of course, when you look at what we're likely to go into over the next 12 months or maybe longer, with rising energy costs and other costs, as well as a recession, I think, then, that money will be harder to come by. So we're going to have to work even harder to deliver. I think on the other side is that we've been battling over the last few years, in some ways, it's ignorance and indifference, which is the sense is that it's not been a burning platform for the industry, apart from a few people, a few very big employers who want to spend the money on this. So we've had to battle away in some ways with very few people, very few resources in order to get us to the point where we've got something which we can excite people about. And frankly, people in British Land are now really excited about these platforms. But as Matt can say, it's been a hell of a battle, both on sustainability to get it become mainstream, but then to say, okay, now you need to set money aside for the stuff. Now you need to go and have that discussion with the occupier about service charge. I think it's much better, but I think we're still going to need a lot of grit and determination to see this happen.
A lot more convincing and slightly lower rates by the sounds of it. Matt, what about you in terms of what's sort of ahead in terms of environmental sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, totally agree with everything Sally said. I think many probably of my ESG colleagues would agree that people are finally listening and ESG's, really moved up the list and it is now in most boardrooms, which is a really positive thing. Making sure that we've got the resource and the skill sets to respond to that is going to be really important. And the thing that I keep drumming on about is carbon intelligent decision making. And I'll come back to the whole life carbon assessment. It's only in the last few years that our industry has got a really good grip on embodied carbon and starting to have the frameworks and the data in place to map that. I think we've been tackling operational carbon for a long time, but embodied carbon, there is still challenges and supply chain doing everything they can to help us with that. But we do need more rapid process. So understanding embodied carbon and whole life carbon, so the carbon associated with the operation and building and deconstruction of places and spaces, and using that to inform carbon intelligent decision making, I think, is something that we will need to focus on significantly in the next few years.
We've come to the LMRE part now, but first, here's a word from our sponsor.
With inflation at its highest since 1982, we want to make sure that both our clients and candidates are prepared for a shift in the prop tech market. A huge advantage of our consultants being 360-degree prop tech recruiters means that we can communicate regularly on both sides of the business. Our job is to make both the hiring process easier for clients and the job searching process easier for candidates. In short, a recession can be intimidating, unpredictable, and tumultuous. But it doesn't need to be. We at LMRE are here to help. Head to our website, lmre.tech, and we can find the right talent for your company's needs.
How we finish these podcasts. So Friday afternoons, I'm sure you guys have better things to do. As much as I've enjoyed it, we finish off with the LMRE part. So L, it's lessons learned. M, it's you can mention someone, a person, a product. R is what's been the most rewarding part. And E, what you're most excited about. So I'll direct each question at one of you and we'll just go through it quickly. Sally, why don't you start us off with the L part? So what's some of the main lessons you've learned throughout your career?
Yeah, I have been, privileged and unprivileged to work at a number of companies throughout my career. And I would say the thing that stands out for me most is the culture, value and leadership of the companies that I've worked for. In that regard, I think both British Land and Cadbury Schweppes, where I've had the longest tenures, have been places which I have enjoyed the most and I think achieved the most.
Thank you for that. I could fully support that as well. I think a big thing at the end, obviously at LMRE, lots of businesses struggle with attracting, say, the best talent, the best skilled talent, but also retaining. And if you're happy in the culture, you're working for a forward-thinking company, you're going to keep it and you're also going to be innovating. Like, innovation doesn't happen in a vacuum, as everyone often says at the moment. But no, Sally, I couldn't support that more. Right, Matt, is there any sort of service, person, product you'd like to mention?
Well, if I may, I think I will mention our own internal digital placemaking team. I was fortunate enough to spend time with them, and particularly the leadership around that. As Sally mentioned, we've had to be quite resilient and first of all, working towards a vision, and then delivering 100 Liverpool Street is kind of realisation of that vision. And then most recently, having that building kind of recognised externally with its accreditation under the SMART score. That's quite a journey that team has been on. So I think they deserve a mention.
Absolutely. Sounds like they've been working bloody hard. Sally, what's been the most rewarding part of working in the digitalization space in real estate?
Well, I guess we might sound a bit like a broken record here, but I think it's been incredibly rewarding working with this small team at British Land, who I think are truly brilliant insofar as how they've navigated their way through what is a very complex landscape and has come up in a very cost-effective way with an incredible set of products, which we are really excited about in terms of going out and selling them to our occupiers to prove to them the benefit of using these products in buildings that they occupy on our campuses.
Yeah, no, we could tell that. And from an outsider, you wouldn't think that you guys have such, but it sounds that lean teams for everything that you're doing in terms of delivering in terms of your digitalization and sustainability strategy. So I think a lot of people listening in will be Googling British Land and everything you're doing. Matt, okay, the last question is, what are you most excited about in terms of, it could be environmental sustainability, it could be technology,
Yeah, well, there's probably two in that. I mean, the challenges of the crisis we find ourselves in terms of the climate are significant. I guess I go from dread to excitement and hopefulness probably on a daily basis. But I'm excited that the recognition that ESG is now gaining and the seriousness that people are starting to approach the subject and understand it with. And then just on the digital side of things, I honestly believe that we've got the technologies in place to help us tackle the problems that we're facing. So I'm excited about, real take-up of low-carbon technologies, but also the digitalization of our real estate, because I think that has got such a significant part to play in the decarbonisation of the built environment.
Love it. Excited, but also very hopeful. Matt and Sally, it's been an absolute pleasure having you both on the podcast and for sharing, obviously, Matt going into such detail about the development as well, and Sally as well, for you sharing more about sort of technologies and the value they've actually created throughout the years for British Land as well. So thank you so much for joining me, and looking forward to catching up with you both after the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been a great discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Lou. Some really good questions there. Really nice to talk to you.
Making a high-quality podcast like this one takes a lot of work. That's a fact. But not when you hire a podcast company. With our white glove experience, we handle everything for you. From guest outreach all the way through to publishing and promotion, we handle it all. You show up to hold great interviews and build relationships with your guests, and we take care of everything else. Podcasting is not just about the audience. Every podcast interview is the start of a new relationship. With a weekly podcast, you'd build relationships with 52 ideal partners or prospects through your podcast interviews over the next 12 months. Do you believe that 52 new relationships would help grow your business? We do. Contact Jason at apodcastcompany.com and let's talk.